The other time that girls leave sport is puberty, because their body goes through a seismic change. Yeah. And it rattles their sense of self. Their bodies physically are different. So the physics of running and all of that have changed. It's all different. The physiology, the physics, the body image, all of it. And it's just easier to just exit stage left than try to deal with it. But if we can get girls through that, they get, and I experience this myself, you get this other phase where you settle into yourself and you've got another level of performance. And if you hang in, I didn't start racing semi-professionally until I was 39. I mean, you can have a very long tail as a female endurance athlete, for sure. But we have to work with our physiology and understand it. And the body image piece is huge.
What's going on, everybody? My name is JP, and I want to welcome you to the Stable Cyclist Podcast, where we talk about bikes, life mentality, and when the occasion arises, we will deep dive into mental health. My guest today is Selene Yeager, the absolute legend, gravel Hall of Famer. But before we get Selene in the studio, I want to tell you about two things. First of all, I want to tell you about the ongoing project we are in the final phases of fundraising for, and that is the third series in the Mahaday film series called Back to the Start. And while the first two series have really focused on race performance and then friendship, this third film, Back to the Start, looks at what it is like to restart your life after a serious mental health diagnosis. And in this case, it is telling my story of what it has been like to rebuild my life after being diagnosed with bipolar 1 in 2020. Now, if that sounds like a project you're interested in supporting, whether it's in the filmmaking itself or in the premiere tour that will happen in the upcoming 6 months, you can hit the link in the description below and you can learn more about how you could give to support that in the final days. And I will add that we do have a matching donor, so whatever you give in these final days will be doubled essentially. You don't have to do anything different. If you give $50, that $50 turns into $100 on the other end. And if you really like using Silka wax, there is a special where you can click on the button for the Silka wax within that link below. And when you give $50, I will send you a bag of Silka wax, and your money will get doubled into $100 by our donor. And a special thanks to Richard at Silka for making this Silka partnership happen in the fundraising. All right, there is so much I could describe Selene Yeager on her resume. If you don't know who she is, she wrote for bicycling for a long time. She has written or co-authored probably the greatest book ever written on female performance in sport, in my opinion. And she is currently also known as the author of probably the greatest book ever written about female performance for females going through menopause. She is also a Gravel Hall of Famer. She is also the host of the hit Play Not Pause podcast on the Feisty Media network. I could go on and on. Let's get Selene Yeager in the studio. Well, Selene Yeager, welcome to the Stable Cyclist Podcast. I do have to say that you are the number one ranked follow I've ever gotten on Instagram. I wasn't following you at the time. You had kind of disappeared off my radar when bicycling stopped being a printed entity in my house, and then I got a follow from you sometime around, I think, the Kerry Warner episode maybe. And welcome to the show. This is a conversation I've been wanting to have for a really long time, so I'm happy you're here.
Well, I'm glad. I think it was. I have to admit, I don't know how long you've been doing this show, and I think it was Kerry Warner that put it on my radar.
Okay, right on. That was kind of a big episode because he got into a lot of emotional things that I think a lot of people wanted to hear about. So, yeah. No, this is fantastic. There's a lot of places we could go to get started, and there's a lot of places I know we will go today in this conversation, but I want to get started, as we always do, with kind of like your journey into bikes, because it kind of sets a paradigm in motion, I think, all the time for where we get with everything else. So, yeah, just how did you arrive in this amazingly wonderful sport?
I've told this story quite a few times. I don't ever mind repeating it. I have always loved riding a bike. Like it's honestly as long as I can remember. And I know everybody says that, but my first dreams, I've always had nightmares as a kid and even as a young adult. I don't have them as much anymore, thankfully. But my first nightmares were me running away from like monsters on my tricycle. I mean, I've always been on a bike. And I remember even when I was very young, the feeling that I would get in my head, like literally in my head, when I would start to coast. As soon as it's that feeling when you go in motion on a bicycle. I feel like now that I'm much older, I understand it. My head is always swirling, and I think that when I put it in motion on a bike, it matches whatever the swirling is in my head and it settles down. Yeah. And it took me many, many years to recognize that sensation, but I've had it ever since I was very young. And I rode everywhere. I rode to my friend's house. Once I got a driver's license, I still would just be like, I wonder if I could ride to my friend Renee's. And she lived 10 miles away, and my parents would be like, what? You know, and there were no cell phones, was none of that. I would just call from Renee's house. But come on at Renee's. How did you get there? I rode my bike. So that was just me. I did not know people raced them. I did not know it was a sport. I did not know the Tour de France existed. I didn't know anything. I just really loved riding a bike.
You just felt freedom, I think, which is what, when we watch our
and peace
kids
of mind.
learn. And when we watch our kids learn how to ride without training wheels for that first time, I'm just like, this is a feeling that will never be replicated the rest of your life. But it's an amazing feeling, and it makes you feel so happy. So you get into the bike. How do we transition from there to you writing about riding bikes?
That happened when I started at Rodale Press. Shortly after I started at Rodale Press. I started there in 1994. And for people who don't know what Rodale Press is, it is the publishing company that was founded in Emmaus, Pennsylvania. And the parent company at the time, it's since been sold, of Bicycling Magazine, Runner's World, Organic Gardening, Prevention, Men's Health, Women's Health, Scuba Diving. I wrote for them all. So I was a science writer, and I was writing for sexy magazines like Infectious Diseases in Children and Optometry Today, and I desperately wanted to get into consumer press, so I kept sending resumes to this company that I found in the Philly Inquirer Help Wanted section, Rodale Press. It sounded like the most magical place I could ever imagine, and if I could just get a job there. So I kept sending them my resume, and they kept sending me rejection letters, and eventually one of them went through. And I wrote it was for the book division. I wrote a book chapter on dental floss that was entertaining enough to get me hired. And I had always wanted to be self-employed, but it seemed like a really perfect place to learn the craft, make connections, and boy, was it ever. I made the best connections in my life, all my friends, my husband, my career, you name it. And they had a shop and swap, and at that point, I hadn't ridden a bike for a while. I went to college and I didn't ride that much. I just walked everywhere and ran. But I bought a bike in the swap and shop. It was a Cannondale, way too big for me. It was like a 56 and I ride like a 50. It was $200. So I started riding with the people at lunch. They always did a lunch ride, and Bill Strickland was on that ride, and they were all like, you should consider racing. You're actually pretty good at this. And I didn't even know what that was, but I was like, okay. And I was also not only a science writer, but I had also gotten certification. So I was a personal trainer and sort of was on that path at the time too. And he said, you should write for us. And that was 1996. And I wrote for them on extended staff as a freelancer until 2021. It was like 28 years.
So you were freelance that whole time that they had you like labeled as the FitChick, and you were doing all the things.
Contributing editor. So I was, which is the best life, honestly.
Sure.
Because it is an annual contract. I know my workload, and I get a check every month. And I'm part of sort of the extended family staff. So it was really it was a dream, honestly.
Yeah. You mentioned that they, encouraged you to come on and write, but they were also encouraging you to get into racing. Mm-hmm. And what was that path like? And were there hesitations for you, or was there enough support around you? Because this was at a time when like female racing was not like You were like a unicorn if you were showing up at a race as a female.
I didn't even think about it. I think maybe because I was always surrounded. I grew up with boys. There were always boys in my neighborhood. I played sports. I played field hockey. That was an all-female sport. But it didn't even really register to me, honestly, except the first race I signed up was a road race. I was the only woman, so of course by default I won. I was like, okay, well, but I also did pretty well. So I always looked at myself in sort of the larger field, and then I didn't love the road racing. I liked riding on the road a lot, and then they introduced me to mountain biking, and I got a bike, and we live by a very technical trail here, South Mountain, East Coast rocks, as they say. And I was just very good at following people's wheels and occasionally would go over my bars, but I learned very quickly. And again, they were like, you should try racing. So I signed up, and there were more women at the mountain bike races. Not still a minority, but there were more fields. Yeah. And I went to Philly for the Fairmont Classic, and I won. And that was actually in a field of people. And I moved up to expert, and I won that. So they were correct, that I had a talent that I didn't know, because I had been building an engine for years without knowing that I was doing that.
For sure. So I've heard you talk a lot about you specialize in writing for performance for women. And
at this point.
At this point, yeah. My memories of you, I tell people I'm from rural Minnesota, and for most of my life, access to learning about riding bikes was limited to Bicycling magazine. And learning how to strength train was limited to whatever you told me to do in said Bicycling There was a moment a week ago where I got my mountain bike out for the first time, and I was like, man, my wrists are just not enthused about this. I'm like, Selene wrote an article a long time ago about what I need to go do to fix this problem rather quickly. And so you are constantly in my reference of learning about how to do things in the bike world. And that magazine was so influential for a person like me who just, the internet wasn't really showing us much yet at that time. But today you're very much known as this women's performance advocate, writer, expert, whatever we want to pin you with. I'm not going to just pin you as menopause lady. We'll get to that later, but
no, it's fine. I mean, I own it now, but yeah, it's been an evolution.
Real quick interruption here to remind you that the Stable Cyclist Podcast is sponsored by Works Cycling Services. They are also my title sponsor this year as I race and I do the things that I do. But Works Cycling Services, while yes, sponsoring riders, yes, providing amazing coaching, is probably best known for their race directing and their race services they put on. They host 4 of the best grassroots races that you will find in Minnesota, but also in the Midwest. They hosted Granny's Gravel Grinder this spring. And if you want to learn more about my experience there, you can dig through my back catalog and the vlog series Bootleg Miles to see how that went for me. They just hosted last weekend the Hot Dish, which is going to be some of the most beautiful racing you've ever experienced, and it was the most beautiful racing I have experienced. That is down in the Driftless region near Winona and features the biggest climbs you will find in the state of Minnesota. Again, you can dive into my experience at the Hot Dish on the Bootleg Miles in my back catalog on YouTube. Coming up later in August, the same day as the Mahahe 100, so I will not be there this year, is the Day Across Minnesota, the Dam. And that is the epic ultra endurance race in the series, and one that everyone who completes it says is a life-changing experience as you race from the South Dakota border to the Wisconsin border. Finally, the last race in the series is the Filthy 50. Again, it's down in that Lanesboro southeastern corner of the state. For those of you familiar with the Almanzo 100, one of the OG gravel races in the United States of America, it is kind of down in those roads. So if you are planning your calendar for later this year, or even you are starting to think about your calendar for next year, I can't recommend enough that you go to Works Cycling Services and look up all the information on these races. And I can tell you, having done 2 out of the 2 so far this year, it has been an amazing grassroots experience with really, really low registration fees. You're going to have an amazing time. Head over to workscyclingservices.com and start planning your journey to Minnesota today. All right, back to Selene. How do we get to that point where you start working with Stacy Sims and you're like, we need to actually tackle this topic? And I'm just I'll tell an aside. When Roar came out, I was like, this is the greatest book that's ever been written for anyone who coaches a female that is not a female. I was a track coach for 20 years, and I remember in like 2012, I had a state champion caliber athlete, and we were at the regional meet, and the idea of like a period affecting someone's performance had not yet crossed my mind, even though I was 10 years into coaching, and I had a wife, and all of this, like, it had not crossed my mind. And her mom walked up to me at the regionals, and she was the favorite to win. And the mom said, I just don't know how this is going to go. She's on her period right now. And I looked at her like, what? Like, what does that have to do? And the day didn't go very well. And I went into like heavy research mode after that, because that's how my mind works. And it totally changed how I coached. And I would start having conversations. And once the girls realized like he's open to having this conversation, like, it changed how our team worked, and we started winning a lot, because we like, hey, let's change what we're doing with training this week, because you just aren't going to be able to do the workload, and you need more recovery and all the things that go with it. So when your book came out, and it wasn't me with my loose leaf studies that I had found anymore, now I go around, and when I speak, especially about mental health, and I speak to coaches of females, I'm like, if you're not paying attention to this thing, you're not coaching the whole athlete, and like you're opening the door for like mental health issues that come with it when you're telling them you're not doing your best and you're not factoring this in. Hopefully that all makes sense. But
100%.
Roar is always in my hands of like every male coach who works with females needs to read this and have a general understanding of it. And so I want to know how we got to that point where you're sitting with Stacy saying, I think we need to write this book in a way that anybody can pick it up and read it, and there's a lot of science behind it.
Yeah, that's a great question, because honestly, JP, I wrote for Bicycling for all of those years until 2000, let's say 14, when I met Stacy. It might have been a little bit before that. I'm trying to remember the exact, and I'll talk about that the moment I met her. And I never thought about it. I did not realize that all of the studies that I was quoting and writing about were vastly done on men, that nobody was looking at these factors. I knew myself, of course, that I had a menstrual cycle and sometimes that I had to navigate some things, but I didn't fully connect dots that I wouldn't connect until much later when I met Stacy. So when I started writing for Bicycling, at that point I was a certified personal trainer, and I felt like I also wanted to become a USA Cycling certified coach, licensed coach, just to further understand and be able to really get into the programming. So I did that very early on. And when you get certified, you need to continue your CECs, your continuing education credits, to keep your certification, et cetera. So every other year, I would go to the USA Cycling Coaching Summit in Colorado Springs. And I have told this story also again and again, and I'm sorry, Isak, but I really dreaded going to that summit after a while, because it was very much, especially in those early years, it was the same guys, and they were almost always men, and they would talk about the same things. And there would be times there would be a man up there in charge of the women's program saying, well, I don't really work with women, but blah, blah, blah. And I literally would sit like just like you, almost wanting to bang my head against the table, thinking, what are we doing here? So it was, I think, 2012 or 2014. Roar came out in 2016. So I can't remember how long the book was marinating before we actually did it. Probably 2014. Anyway, I was going on my way. I gave a call to my friend James Herrera, who lives out there. He was also a coach. He worked with Carmichael for a long time. And I'm like, I'm coming out for this thing. Let's plan on riding. Can I stay at your house? And he said, I think you're going to really like it this year. There's a woman presenting, Stacy Sims. Definitely go to her presentation. I thought, okay. So I went to her presentation, and she stood up there and she talked about the luteal phase and plasma volume during the luteal phase and menstrual cycles and stuff I had never, ever, ever heard anyone talk about on any of those stages in regards to cycling or honestly performance in general. And I have always been connected to the book division at Rodale and other publishers because I still co-author lots of books. I still do. Yeah. And I thought that this woman needs a book. This woman, I absolutely needs a book. And when she left the auditorium, it was like the Messiah had walked. Like people just jumped up and like were following her out because nobody had ever talked about any. There's this giant line to ask her questions. So I just got in this giant line and I got to her and I said, you need a book and I can help you write it. And she said, cool, let's do it. And 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Fairfax and we were putting together the makings of Roar.
How, you recognize that it was necessary. And obviously the line, like you said, after she speaks to everybody being like, oh, this is relevant. Like we need to have this. But how much trepidation was there on your part of like, boy, we are really going off into the dark here compared to what the norm is, I guess?
It's funny. I was so excited about the book because it was so groundbreaking and I recognized it as groundbreaking. But the internet was not what it was now. So getting it out there was not like you could today. It just like social media promotion and all that just wasn't as strong. And the publishers aren't always great about pushing out books themselves. And Stacy at the time had 200 followers on Instagram. She's a scientist, right? So yeah, so it made kind of a splash initially and then just faded out into the ocean. I thought, I was so frustrated because I really had a sense that it was groundbreaking material. And then it was a couple years later, the editor that had picked up the book emailed me and he said, hey, are you interested in doing something else with Stacy, a follow-up? And I thought, what's happening? And I saw that the book was suddenly selling and she had hired Feisty Media, which then had an agency arm to sort of help her. And all they did is what anybody really should have done is taken stuff from the book and promoted it and got her out into the greater. And now she's got, I don't know, more than 500,000, some giant number, and she's all over the place. But it had a real delayed reaction to it. And now sometimes I look and she's selling 5,000 copies a week of that thing, when I look at the book scan. So it's completely changed how people think about the science of physiology when it comes, compares to men versus women. Yeah.
No, I would have found it during that second wave. She must have had an interview maybe on cycling tips or something like that. And ironically, we were on our way to the state meet. I was with a van full of girls, and I just had on what was ever playing. And they were listening along. They're like, this is kind of like what you talk about a lot. And I'm like, yeah, this lady put a book out finally. And they're like, oh, that's really good. So you have mentioned, I've heard you talk also a lot about how, yes, there is this female piece, but also with it, there's the strength training piece that helps. I've also heard you talk a lot about body image and just the mess that is to navigate through. And of course, when you have this monthly dealing that also makes you have swings and roundabouts with how you look, because that happens, right? It's not just like, oh, I have my period. There's all these other changes that influence performance especially, but how much is it like not just dealing with the menstrual cycle, but it is like holistic athlete treatment and dealing with some of those other pieces as well? And why are you so passionate? I think I heard you say at one point, the body image problems never leave you.
They never leave you. They never leave you. They are so ingrained. And I'm always a little hopeful that it's getting better. And then I see like skinny talk on TikTok and I think, oh, will we ever be free? I think that I do believe it has gotten better because there are more women in the weight room and there's more women setting really, really good examples of being strong and feminine and sexy and all the things that women are told they should be and want to be and all of that. for the longest time, there weren't a whole lot of options. You were supposed to be as skinny as possible, and that it kind of breaks your brain, and it doesn't always go with athletics. However, sometimes you get into endurance sports, and they still push you that way. You hear that with women cyclists all the time, women runners. Lauren Fleischman wrote an incredible book called Good for a Girl. Yeah. Incredible book. That is another one that I think people should read more, because she's breaking important ground too, talking about how the other time that girls leave sport is puberty, because their body goes through a seismic change. Yeah. And it rattles their sense of self. Their bodies physically are different. So the physics of running and all of that have changed. It's all different. The physiology, the physics, the body image, all of it. And it's just easier to just exit stage left than try to deal with it. But if we can get girls through that, they get, and I experience this myself, you get this other phase where you settle into yourself and you've got another level of performance. And if you hang in, I didn't start racing semi-professionally until I was 39. I mean, you can have a very long tail as a female endurance athlete, for sure. But we have to work with our physiology and understand it. And the body image piece is huge, because if all you're being told is restrict, be as skinny as possible, you're fighting a physiology that is just innate. It's going to win, or it will just shut you down. Yeah. And I talk to people all the time, and the story's all the same. They get this message, they're supposed to be leaner, so they restrict, and then for a little bit, it works for a little bit, and then the body's like, starts shutting, it's kind of like, start shutting down stuff in the background. So the period goes, and then the immunity goes, and then before you know it, there's this hole that you've put yourself in that you might not emerge from. So and a lot of that starts with the body image piece. It starts with that. You can't separate these things out.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, it's why when I speak to mental health groups about sport, it's a holistic approach is going to be your best bet. And a lot of times for those teenage girls, the best thing that can happen is be involved in sport and be involved in movement and keep the body working. And it's a little bit like when people are depressed and we don't want them to sit around, we want them to move just to keep moving forward. But by this point in the show, Selene, my 87% male listener audience might not be here completely. And I don't honestly care. That used to bother me a lot. Maybe. I had such big,
I don't know. I mean, they all listen to me at bicycling, so.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I look at my metrics, and I know when I have females on what the numbers do versus when I don't, and I don't care. I have 4 daughters at home. I have a wife at home, and I want to continue to press forward with getting women's voices on here. And you definitely, your numbers at Feisty Media and your podcast show that there are a ton of women showing up. They just maybe don't look at things the same way that men do. And I think the best quote I've heard you say about this, you were talking on the Marginal Gains podcast, which of course is very man-centric again.
Very man-centric, that one.
And you
love those guys, but whoa.
Yeah, no, for sure. But you said, what if women just don't want to do the Unbound 200? Have we thought about that?
I think about that stuff all the time. I've been in so many discussions, and so over decades, literally decades of discussions, and I to this day, I just had this conversation not that long ago. And I obviously think that there is a population of women who want to do those things, and there are barriers in the way. Sure.
Yeah.
And maybe they don't. Maybe they want to express their athleticism in another way. And what I worry about is that we're making that population feel less than because they're not doing the biggest thing in the sport. And that bugs me, and it still bugs me. I think, yes, we should look at barriers, address barriers, make sure that all these opportunities are open and encourage and all of the things. I'm all for it. And I'm always cognizant to that other piece. Like, okay, and if they still don't want to, are we saying that they're less than because they're not doing this thing that men developed and maybe a woman would have never invented? I don't know. You know, I mean, you think about, I think about that kind of stuff all the time, you know? So,
100%. Yeah, no, and I do too, because at some point in the last 5 years, I went from only thinking about racing all the time to this being much more of a mental health and like what it does. And I'm like, okay, well, if it's a mental health piece for me, that means it could be a mental health piece for somebody who doesn't want to race. And how do we get them on how do we get them on a bike, or how do we, you know, I look at the people that are involved with All Bodies on bikes, and like, I'm really interested to like, I want to have coffee with you guys for like 3-4 hours and just pick your brains. And I want to know when you kind of had that revelation, because you were a part of like 1,000 women at the starting line, I think at Unbound and at Gravel Worlds, or just at Unbound?
It was 200 women, 200 miles at Unbound.
Okay.
Before that, I was also part of 100 women at the Single Speed Cyclocross World Championships in San Francisco. That they had an initiative, which for people who don't know, that's not really the World Championships, but that's another story. Yeah. I mean, I have, you know, people ask me to get involved in these initiatives, and I'm more than happy to get involved in these initiatives. Girls Ground Gravel is involved in one right now. More women, more miles. And when I have these discussions, I still always bring up that thought, like, maybe it's okay. Like, you know, I meet a lot of women, and they're very happy doing the distance, but unfortunately they're always left saying, oh, I'm only doing this, I'm only, and I feel like we're making them feel that way, and that bothers me. Like, that's what that sticks with me, because I hear it so often, and I think it is okay if you don't want to spend, because I know what that takes, I know what that looks like. It does look like dropping everything in your life. If you want to do a 200-mile race, it is all consuming. It's like training for an Ironman. And it's okay if you don't want to do that. There's nothing lesser about you.
Yeah. So what are some of the alternatives that you're seeing that are really successful at getting people involved and having this become part of a regular part of their lives?
I think there's all kinds of things right now. I mean, you mentioned All Bodies on Bikes, and they are outstanding. I know Marley. I know that crew. There's also just a movement of enjoying a day on bikes that is not competitive that I think is
novel idea.
That people really enjoy too, where you have marked courses and fun aid stations and all this stuff, but it's not a competitive event. It's just an event, like a bike century, kind of thing used to be, only on gravel, which is now having its moment in the sun. And I think that bike packing also has really attracted a lot of other people who wouldn't necessarily, because they're attracted to that, being able to go and see more stuff than you can on your feet. It allows you to travel a little longer, see more things. There's a lot of avenues that people can enjoy a bicycle, express themselves athletically, that don't involve pinning on a number and wanting to throw up the morning of a race and all of the things that come with that,
Yep.
Bike parks. You see a lot of women at bike parks now. I see a lot of women on mountain bikes at bike parks, and that's rad. I enjoy that.
Yeah, 100%. So how does this transition happen to where you're now like menopause lady in the bike world?
Menopause?
Aside from
it's that simple, really.
Aside from like, hey, I wrote a book, but like, and maybe you were starting to think about this beforehand, if I'm remembering your stories correctly. I've heard you say on other pods, but how do you go from there's women's performance we need to worry about like on a regular basis to like there is this population of women that are not only not really being talked about, they're being ignored completely, and it affects performance?
Well, I became one. I mean, that's honestly, that's just the real story. When we came out with Roar, We had one chapter on menopause, and I heard very, very quickly from a population of women that was not sufficient. And I was 45-ish at the time and still racing at the top of my game. And I just sort of honestly, and I have apologized for this many times, I shrugged. I didn't know. I didn't know it was...
Yeah.
I just didn't know. And you don't know what you didn't know. And I also didn't know that some of the stuff I was experiencing at the time, one of the things being crazy anxiety attacks and waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks. I didn't know that was hormonal. I just thought life was finally just pulling the threads of my sanity apart.
Yeah.
So I didn't know. And then and Stacy too was about, we're not far apart in age. She's a little younger than I am even. And she wasn't in that world herself yet either in her research or herself. So it wasn't until I hit 48-ish and I was like, oh, it really does when your hormones, because women's hormones, unlike men's testosterone takes a gentle ride, downward slope over the course of their lives. It's sort of like anything, age is what it is. But females, the ovaries do this thing where you send out fewer eggs and it throws your hormones into chaos. And then you could have 10 years of just a little bit of madness where your moods aren't right and things aren't quite right, but you can fumble through. But then when the ovaries flip the close sign and put up the chairs and turn off the lights, the hormones go suddenly down. Estrogen and progesterone go suddenly down, and you have estrogen receptors in your brain everywhere. Your muscles, the estrogen has anabolic effects for women. I didn't know any of this, but wow, when those hormones dive quick, you feel it profoundly. And it was well known that women were disappearing from start lines around 50. Again, just never connected some dots. And I was like, I see what's going on, and I see what those women were talking about. And nobody's talking about this because ageism and sexism and all the isms just sort of come together, and you're sort of oddly embarrassed because you're getting older, and you feel like, oh, I can't say menopause because that means I'm old and not worthwhile paying attention to, and all of this stuff. And nobody is immune from that. We all swim in the same water of the culture. Yeah. And I just thought, all of those women were correct, and this is so dumb, because Stacy also was starting to study at the time, too, that if we just knew, once I knew the anxiety was hormonally driven, it got better, because at least I understood. I didn't even do anything, and it got better, because I understood what was behind it. And then you can start working with stuff. When I saw that my power numbers just plummeted, and where did my muscle go? I was like, I need to start lifting heavy. I need to take this seriously. And it made things better. Yeah. And if there's stuff you can do, it's terrible just to not share that information. So I thought, I have this microphone. At the time, I didn't have a podcast yet, but I had a platform. Stacy was game. The publishers were like, yes, let's write this book. We put together Next Level. And then the podcast came, and it has been the most satisfying. I've said it so many times, but it has been the most satisfying work of my life, because I have women come up to me crying, literally crying, at events, at everywhere. I get emails, I get DMs, pigeons fly through my window with notes, and it's all the same. I thought I was done. I thought it was just me. I thought, and it's transformative for women, and it's so unbelievable that it's 2025 and we are just now having menopausal conversations out loud in the mainstream when 51% of the population goes through what is a giant seismic shift in a woman's life. It is like puberty, but in the other direction, and there's so much you can do. And it's just I could obviously talk about this forever. I've been talking about it for 5 years, and there's 3 million downloads, but that's how I got here, and that's what I do.
Yeah. So when you get that podcast started, and your podcast is on Feisty Media, and remind me again of the name of your podcast.
Hit play, not pause.
Perfect. As you're getting started with this initially, were you like, I know exactly what we're going to talk about, and I know exactly how this is going to go? Or were you like, I don't know what we're doing here, other than I have a book to kind of work through.
Oh, no. I mean, it's funny because people did say that. They're like, what are you going to talk about? I'm like, are you kidding me? I've been telling people how to ride their bike for 28 years.
Yeah.
Like I can tell you how to eat right and exercise for 30 years of my life. I got this. And I knew that there would be new research and there would be all kinds of things, and that because menopause affects every single cell of your body, there's all ways to approach it. So, and I'm a writer and storyteller by nature. Yeah. So yeah. I knew I had many of these women in my phone already who were doing research on this, and I knew who to call up. And once you start talking to some of the big names, the other big names see, and then you get, how all that works. Yeah. So I mean, I was very clear on how I was going to approach this.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing show, and people need to listen to it, because there's a lot of good stuff in there. So before we get into the less serious stuff that we always dive into on this show, my big question is, I do have a primarily male audience. Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of guys are going to do the dumb thing and purchase your book, but give it to their wife and say, here, this will solve your problems. And that is not necessarily the order of operations, but what can men be doing in their day-to-day if they have spouses or partners who are going through menopause, perimenopause, all the things? What can men be doing to be better partners and supportive people in their lives?
I think the biggest thing is you don't need to try to fix a lot of times, and
of course not.
I'm painting with a very broad brush, but a lot of times men, with the best of intentions, want to fix things.
Yep.
Right. My husband's that. I get it. Women often just want to be understood and heard and believed.
Yeah.
Because often we're not understood, heard, or believed. So those are the biggest things you can do. One of the things that is probably the top thing that is most devastating to women is the body composition changes that happen during this time. Yeah. Yeah. And it is especially devastating to active women. And I have 35,000 women in our Hit Play Not Pause complimentary Facebook group, and it comes up all the time. And just like puberty, when those hormones start doing their thing, there are a lot of body composition changes that are out of her control. Yes. And there are things that you can do. Yes, you can lift. There's dietary changes, all in Next Level, all in the book, all in the podcast. But it doesn't work perfectly for everybody, and sometimes it is what it is. And she needs to feel loved and accepted and all of those things while she's going through that, because it is devastating. And I see it all the time. And you can see I'm getting a little choked up, because I don't think there's anything harder in especially in active women's life, when you're so used to A plus B equals C, and all of a sudden, your body is doing something completely different. So I think just really, really believing and understanding and being that support system is very, very important. And educating yourself a bit. You don't need to listen to my show all the time or whatever, but skim through the book and just see, you'll see everything estrogen does. You'll see why the things that are happening and why she's feeling what she's feeling. And you can support her through the journey, because there's lots of things. Hormone therapy is broadly safe. It's much more acceptable in the medical circles now. It can help with a lot of things. But it takes some time. It takes some time to dial in that stuff, and for it to settle in, and for all of it to work the way you're hoping it's going to work. So patience is key, understanding, but really just listen and believe.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, Selene. And thank you just for taking the lead on all this work, because it is helping a lot of people live a better life, like you said, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. So, all right, we always close the show out with a little bit of nonsense, if you will, or some lighter stuff. You're not the first person to get a little emotional, and so we always try to ease back into the chill zone. So, you like riding gravel.
I do.
You are You're a Hall of Famer, and
yes, I am.
You are a Hall of Famer in the gravel world, and so you and I are going to go on a gravel ride together. And this is not like a performance ride. This is just, we're going to go on a long bomb.
Down.
Yep, long bomb, fun day. And at some point, we're going to run out of supplies on this
Happens all the time.
Ride. Yep. And our only option is a rural gas station that's not going to have like all the, we're not stopping it as a Casey's, I guess is what I'm saying. This is more rural than that.
Oh,
so, okay.
I'm in Pennsylvania, man. I understand.
Yeah. Okay. So what are we getting to eat and drink for sustenance?
I'm getting a, hopefully they have a iced coffee of some sort. You know, it could be anything. It could be one of the ones you get like, I'll settle for a Monster coffee-ish. I'd rather not. I'd rather it be like a real Starbucks cold brew. If they have it, that's a luxury. That's great. But I'll take whatever like iced coffee kind of thing they can have. And payday. I have done many rides on paydays. Yeah. Many rides on paydays.
Yeah. Payday comes out of a holster for me. That's first choice. I've never thought about the iced coffee, though. That's a great recommend.
I dream about... Whenever we stop, I'm always just foraging. I'm like, please let them have a good iced coffee.
I'm going to have to try that next time. Yeah. Okay. When you're out on the bike, are you a music person? Do you listen to music while you're riding?
Sometimes. Sometimes. It depends. I will usually, if I'm going to listen to something now, I often listen to a podcast now because...
Yep.
You know, there's a park that I'll ride, and if I'm just going out for sunshine and a spin, I'll listen to a show that I've been wanting to listen to, sometimes educational, sometimes just not, you know, sometimes just something else just to take my mind in another place. I usually only listen to music when I want to do efforts, honestly.
Yep.
So
Same.
when I'm training for something, I did a VO2 test the other day, which I haven't done in so long, and I 100% use music. Music has a really good place. When I was never one of those people who raced with music, though.
Right.
Like a lot of people would have, and it would just kind of annoy me. Like I wanted to be more present than that, even when it was very long days. That's crazy to me.
That's crazy to me to race with music, but
yeah, I never did that. I will tell you, I did an ultra run in Patagonia, Arizona at the end of February. And I always run with something because running is not my main. Like I don't want to be running without anything is a very difficult task for me. So I always have something. And for whatever reason that day, I was like, I'm just going to be, you know, for like my 20 miles of trail running, I'm just going to be present. And it was great until it wasn't. Like the last 5 miles or so they were into like an unbelievable headwind, and it was just a dusty trail, flat. And I kept thinking, my God, what am I doing? I wish I had some music. But anyway, yeah.
What's on the Selene Yeager Spotify playlist? What are you listening to when you're doing these things?
We had, and I can't even tell you all the songs on it. So I had on this woman, Christine Dierkel. She's a really popular Peloton instructor. Okay. And she also races at the velodrome close to me. And I had her on the show, and she's very well known for her music when she does her Peloton stuff. So she put together a playlist for my show that Fantastic. I could share with my audience, which is amazing. So it has like really good songs on it. Zen is up there, like it's all very. There's got to be a little E by all of all the songs, but so I listened to that, and we also have a Feisty Life playlist that has, Beyonce and Lizzo. Like whenever we have a live event at Feisty, we've all dumped songs into the Spotify. So Megan Thee Stallion, it's just got all of our music, so it's really fun to listen to that.
Sure. All right, next question, and this is a very important answer. Are you into Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings?
Lord of the Rings. I am not a Harry Potter person. I tried to read that, and sorry, all the Harry Potter. I tried to read it. I never got into it. I never liked it. I appreciate Never liked it. Kind of like Jethro Tull. I get it. They're talented, but no thanks.
Sure.
My father taught The Lord of the Rings, J.R. Tolkien, in high school for 38 years. He has got a Gandalf tattoo and he's got Lord of the Rings tattoos on him. So it is a familial thing. It's, nature, nurture, both ways, whatever.
Yeah. Fair. Okay. You mentioned Good for a Girl earlier. What books would you recommend for people that are not yours? Obviously, we mentioned Roar and Next Level, and you have a whole slew of other bicycling books that you've written. But what books would you recommend, like, if you had to just hand somebody, this is a really good book to read in our kind of world that we exist in together?
Incredibly Bright Creatures, which is a fiction book about an octopus. Because it's so delightful. It's just one of the most delightful books I've ever read, and I've loved it so much. I'm a big fan of good fiction, so I think that is the book that I would tell everybody that they need to just enter another little universe for a while and read that book.
Fantastic. All right, what is a race that you have done that we should all go do?
Ooh. And I know I can't say Unpaved because we're not supposed to say things that we're involved with, but...
No, go for it. I don't care.
I do really like Unpaved and of the Susquehanna River Valley. I mean, in all seriousness, I feel like there's everything's the West, and I get it. Yeah. But wow, we have so much. There are jewels here on the East Coast where you're just surrounded by a kaleidoscope of green or foliage that does something else to your brain, and the dirt is so perfect and tacky and wonderful. And I am an East Coaster at heart, so I really do like these East Coast events. Like Big Sugar, I really like that event. I like those things. I mean, I could tell you, like, I think everyone should be able to do Brazil Ride, but not everyone's going to be able to go to Brazil and do a stage race there. But I do think, like, come on over to the East Coast, everyone, and try it out. See, it's kind of like when people go to Unbound and they're like, wow, it's really beautiful in the Flint Hills. It's just like you just don't appreciate that kind of beauty until you're in it, and then you're like, oh, it is really, really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say this keeps it at 100%. Every single East Coast guest I've had on has basically said some iteration of what you just did about, like, we're kind of forgotten over here, but it's really awesome, and you should come
I heard, was it Pete Stetina talking about Tennessee? Somebody was just on recently. 100% is so beautiful. Yes. North Carolina, Tennessee, North Georgia. I could go on and on. It's just, there's this we've got a big, beautiful country, and it's not all just Colorado.
No, it is not. All right, so that's a race somebody should come do. What's a race that you look at the map today and you say, I haven't done that, but that looks like a lot of fun?
Oh, Morocco has me really, that caught my attention recently.
Okay.
I have maybe Morocco fever, yeah.
Okay, right on. Right on. Well, where can people find you in all the various places, Selene, if they want to come follow along on the journey beyond just purchasing your books?
Well, they can find me personally. I still have my Instagram is FitChick3 because I just never changed it from 1,000 years ago. So you can find me personally there. And if they're interested for all the professional stuff I do, honestly, just go to FeistyMenopause.com. You'll find the Hit Play Not Pause podcast. I have a Feisty 40+ newsletter that I write for Masters Women. Just breaking down all the training stuff you can use. And that's probably the best way to find me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time today, Selene. This has been awesome.
No, thank you. I appreciate the chance.
Thanks for hanging out with Selene and I today. If you enjoyed this conversation, or you can think of others who might really enjoy it, and I think there's a lot of people in our lives who may benefit from this conversation, please share it with them. That is the number one way you help the podcast grow. Also, if you enjoyed it, please go to Also, if you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a thumbs up and make sure you are subscribed. If you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you have not yet given us a 5-star review, please do so. Please and thank you. Finally, more important than anything we've talked about all day today, remember that you are loved.